everyone, this is Mindy for Lawnfawn, and in today's video I am creating this really fun and colorful card focusing on the balloon stencil. And really I'm going to be doing a lot of overlapping of colors. Some of the supplies that I dug out for this card is the Bubbles of Joy stamp set. I also have the grass border, the Elephant Parade add-on for that cute little elephant. And then for my sentiment, I was debating between the Henry Jr.'s ABCs and the big scripty words, either in the stamp set or the hot foil plate, and then the cloudy stencil and the balloon stencil. I'm going to start first by creating my background, and I wanted to have these clouds back there. And I quickly decided that the slimline cloudy stencil was going to work better for this than the regular cloudy stencil because I'm going to be creating a landscape card. So this is a 4¼ by 5½ piece of 80-pound white cardstock. And I'm starting with Forget Me Not ink from Lawn Fawn. I tapped off a lot of the excess ink onto my work surface just so I can come in really soft. Now, one of the reasons I love using the slimline stencils is because I can just shift it across my cardstock. I'll go down and over a little bit, and it really creates these great layers. Now, if I wanted to, I could flip and use the other side to get even more variations of my clouds. And when I ink blend, I start on the stencil and just blend lightly up off of the stencil. So I'm getting that very, very faint blue in the background. Now for my balloons, I'm going to forewarn you, I go through quite a bit of Post-it tape, and this is a little bit time consuming, but it is going to be kind of a focal point of my card. So I really do spend a lot of time on it. So I'm starting off on the far left side of my cardstock, and I have it overhanging the edge because I need to fit as many colors as I can. I masked off the surrounding areas so I don't get any ink on them, and I'm going to start with guava ink. Now, I am loving these little bitty blending brushes that Lawn Fawn now carries because they are perfect for stenciling on these smaller images. So I picked up some of that guava ink, tapped off the excess, and I start once again on the stencil and blend my way onto the cardstock. Very, very light-handed. I'm not applying a lot of pressure because I want it to be a soft color in the center to start with, and then I'll come back in and add a little bit more pressure to the edges. That way it gives it kind of a dimensional look. And as I get towards the center, I'm going to just go back to being light-handed so it has that gradual fade. Now I can peel up my Post-it tape. This is a 2-inch Post-it tape. I'll peel that off and I'm going to just pick up my stencil. So there I started my rainbow with my red balloon. Now I'm going to be doing a lot of cleaning in between all of this too. And off on the side there, I'm trying to sneak it in on screen, is I have a spray bottle that I filled with rubbing alcohol. I just lay this onto my rag. I spray the stencil with the rubbing alcohol and just wipe that ink away. Now I'm going to repeat that same step with the rest of my rainbow colors. So I'm starting off, I shifted my stencil over just a little bit. I'm going to keep all of my balloons kind of in a straight line, and part of that is going to overlap the red balloon. Now, once again, I am masking off all the surrounding areas because I tend to get a little carried away with my blending, and I'm moving on to fake tan. So once again, tapping off that excess, coming in kind of light, and then really having that darker color towards the outer edges. Now, I did keep this in rainbow order because of the fact I know that when these colors overlap, they're going to look good. I'm not going to create brown in that overlap. Next, I'm going to come in with sunflower ink. Now, this one I did have to bring in a little bit darker of a yellow, and I will bring in number 2 pencil to add to the outer edges of this particular balloon. Each time in between each color, I am cleaning off the stencil. Now, one thing I do I'm mindful about is that as you're placing Post-it tape or Post-it notes, whatever you're using, around your area to mask it off, you're also kind of picking up some of that ink that you just applied. So here you can see I have some fresh Post-it tape because I don't want to transfer ink onto the rest of my cardstock. That has happened before. So I want to just be mindful of that, and that's why I grabbed that fresh tape. Now this is the mermaid color, I believe, from Lawn Fawn. And then my last color here is going to be the grape jelly. Now you're going to notice that I did skip green, And that's because I knew that the yellow and the blue overlap would kind of give a green. I'm also going to be bringing green into my card with the grass, and I really wanted to try and fit purple in there. Now that all of my balloons are across the front of the card, I'm going to turn my card so it is portrait, and I'm going to be adding in those streamers to go along the top of my card. I just thought it was easier to turn my card this way. I'm going to mask off my balloons, and since I still had my purple out, I'm going to go through that rainbow order. I did bring in peacock to have that show up just a little bit more, but continuing with the rest of my colors. Sometimes I was able to use the leftover ink on my mini blending tools. Other times I had to bring my ink pad back in so that it could show up in that background because sometimes those streamers kind of hung down over the balloons, which I was totally okay with. Once this part is done, I can remove that post-it tape and I'm going to turn my cardstock one more time because I almost forgot to add the tails for my balloons. So to do that, I'm going to just pick one of those tails. I'm going to butt it up right next to my balloon. I'm going to mask off the areas around it. And for this, I'm going to be using manatee ink. I just picked a really light gray. I do tap off excess a lot and even sometimes use the remaining ink. I don't go back to the ink pad too often because I didn't want the string to look dirty, but I did want it to be significant on there. I wanted that to be able to show up. So I'm going to go through and do that for each of the balloons. I can just leave my post-it tape in place, pick up my stencil, and move it over to the next one until I have all my balloon strings. Now, there is also some areas on the stencil that will create like shine spots on the balloons that I thought was really fun. So I'm going to go through and add shine spots to the balloons where you would actually see that shine spot. My red was kind of cut off, so I didn't add it to that one, but I did go through and add it to the orange, yellow, blue, and I think I did the purple. So for that, once again, I'm using one of those mini blending tools and some Yeti pigment ink. Now you do have to be careful with pigment ink because it is a thicker ink and it can take a little while to dry. So when I do my stencil, I don't move it around a lot because I don't want to smear the previous ink. So as I was finishing that, I decided I wanted to add some sparkles to this. So I took the stencil and I lined that top area up with my ink blended areas for the streamers. And I'm going to bring in some fairy dust stencil paste. I'm just going to use a palette knife and pick some of that out of the jar and just spread that over that open area. So it's going to give the front of my card a lot of sparkle. Then I always wipe my palette knife off with a baby wipe and I take this to the sink and wash it off right away. Since I had all of my ink blending tools out and my ink, I decided to do my grass right away. So for this, I'm starting with celery ink. This time I'm using a bigger blending brush to cover more area. So I'm starting out with a really light color. I wasn't sure how high I wanted my grass to go just yet. So I had that kind of fade off a little bit, maybe about a quarter of the way. And then I'm going to come in with freshly cut grass to give it a little bit of contrast. So it's going to be light towards the top and darker towards the bottom. Then I'll use the grass border die, line that up over my area and run that through the die cut machine. And I kind of just go through and I pick off all the little paper hairs that get left behind sometimes. So I brought my grass in and I'm kind of trying to figure out, it definitely was too much grass because it was covering up a lot of my strings. So I just took that over to my mini paper trimmer, trimmed that down, and then I'll come back in with that freshly cut grass and add a little bit more of that darker color to the bottom. I purposely had the balloons kind of down lower because I wanted to make sure I'm leaving room for a sentiment. Now I can move on and start working on my images. So I picked out these sweet mice from Bubbles of Joy. I just immediately thought of that mouse that looks like he looks like he's riding a bubble, but in my case, he's going to be riding a balloon. So that's kind of where everything started was that mouse. But then I also brought in the elephant from the Elephant Parade add-on and of course that sweet little heart balloon. And I'm stamping these on the 80-pound white cardstock in jet black ink. I'm going to be coloring in my mice and everything else with my Olo markers today, which is an alcohol marker. You can use whatever you happen to have on hand. For my mice, I decided to go with kind of almost a yellowish brown color because I knew that my elephant was going to be created gray or colored in gray. So I wanted to keep that color separation there. So as I'm coloring in the mice, I do have to tell you a little story about my poor little elephant here. So this one, I did happen to have one already colored that was in my stamp set. I had just kind of die cut it out and set it off on the side. When you stamp your images down, make sure you wait for your ink to dry. When I went to go color in this elephant, I colored right over that black dot for the eye and it smeared it. And I tried everything I could to fix it. I brought in my colorless blender and everything. I had this big, huge streak going across my poor elephant's face. So be mindful when you have thicker areas like that, the circles. Just make sure your ink is dry before you come in with any of your coloring mediums. So instead of going through that awful process once again, because that did kind of crush me a little bit, I just am going to end up replacing him with the elephant that I previously colored off screen. So I added little pink bellies and ears to the mice and then colored in my heart. And then I'm going to bring in the coordinating dies for each of these, line them up and hold them down with Post-it tape, and then run them through my die cut machine. Once those are all die cut, I'm going to take them over and start building my scene and seeing where everything is going to lay. Definitely wanted that mouse up on the top of the balloon, kind of hanging out, and deciding what sentiment I wanted. I really did like these scripty sentiments. I thought it was very playful for my card design. And as much as I love hot foiling, I just thought a nice black sentiment, black stamped sentiment would really pop off the front of the card. So I'm using my scratch paper here that I had done my ink blending for my grass, and I'm going to stamp this big hugs. There are lots of great sentiments on that stamp set, but big hugs is just kind of a really nice general card that I like to make. So I'm stamping that in the black licorice ink, and then I will use the coordinating die to die cut that sentiment out. I also go through and cut a couple more pieces out of white cardstock, and I layer it together with the liquid glue to help build up that dimension, kind of have it pop off the front of card a little bit more, because since these are pretty scripty and tiny areas, it's easier to build up that dimension with die cuts than it is with foam squares. Now all of my components are ready and I can start putting my card together. So I started with the grass, just using a tape runner. And now all of my images, the elephant, the mice, I all have foam squares added to the back of them. Now here, my original plan was this particular mouse, I wanted it to look like it was reaching for one of the balloons in the background, and the balloon was going to go to the elephant. But that was kind of in the way of a sentiment. So I just switched that up. I left the elephant kind of on its own there, and I gave the balloon to the mouse. And here I used my sentiment as a placeholder so I knew where I could put that mouse that's going to be riding the balloon, and then just adding in the other characters, adding some liquid glue behind my sentiment, and adding that right in top there. Now I have just a couple more finishing touches, and that is adding some highlights to my critters using a white Jelly Roll pen. And then I'm going to bring in some unicorn stickles, and I'm going to add that into my balloon for even some more sparkle. And then that will finish off my card. So I was really happy with how this turned out. I wasn't sure exactly how it would be. I just kind of had an idea, starting with that cute little mouse at the top riding the balloon. He was kind of the start of the whole show. So I hope you enjoyed today's card project and gave you some inspiration using that balloon stencil. Thank you so much for joining and see you again soon.